on here, but Frida is still with us, and she was so excited to watch your sermon. She is 98.
Wow.
I know.
Amazing.
Nancy and
give
Jamie.
her my love.
I will. Nancy and Jamie will join us. I'm not sure if Molly, but Molly's still with us. Molly Chan.
Wow, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
Molly?
gosh. I was in New York briefly about 5 years ago, and I think I saw Molly's son. I can't remember his first name.
Donovan.
I was going in the middle of the subway or something, like back before the pandemic times, whenever that was. And I was like, wait, I think that's Donovan. But then it was like happened so fast, I couldn't like stop. And that was amazing. Anyway, it is amazing to be in this space. Yeah. Wow. Please give her my love as well.
I will. So we've got and Faith Grill, they ended up moving to Florida. She retired off the trust a few years ago, but she still comes in virtual. So I don't think she can make it today, but she said to send you her love. So we've got the old guard, and we have a brand new family that are not brand new. They've been members for 10, 15 years, but
amazing.
I'm excited to introduce you to today. I think we're waiting on a couple more folk, right, Joe?
Yeah, we have some stragglers for sure on Sunday. Okay.
Well, let me just
such a heavy weekend with 9/11 yesterday.
Yeah, there was so much going on.
Yeah.
Well, let me turn it over just for now for Joe. Jen, let me introduce you. Joe Pila is the co-chair of our board of hospitality, which used to be our old deacons board, but of course we've gotten complicated and renamed everything. Like, who would care? But he hosts our coffee hours every second Sunday, and so he was going to open it up for us, and then maybe we can have everybody go around and just say hello and introduce themselves, and then we'll start.
Sure. So I just wanted to welcome everyone and thank you all for making the time to come in on our second Sunday. This was an idea that we had, I think, last December, and I'm really proud of the fact that we've had a coffee hour every single month, 9 in a row. So hopefully, soon we'll get back in action, and we'll have it with, some home baked muffins, which I think by the time that comes, I will forget how to make them. But so Jackie, who's on our iPhone 11, I guess she's outside and doesn't want to show her face. We co-chaired the board of hospitality and fellowship. So we're responsible for, organizing the service and dealing with ushering, making sure everybody has what they need, signing everyone for coffee hour, and then also new membership. So that's what our role is. And I don't know if other people want to say hi to Jen, or, I don't think you probably know Raquel. Maybe I'll pitch it over to you. Just introduce yourself.
What?
I know you hate to talk.
Hi, I'm beautiful. Raquel. Get on screen. I started going to MABC about a decade ago. I don't remember when I joined. I'm fuzzy with the math, but your introduction this morning, I was sleep deprived, but I was like, oh my gosh, what church is she talking about? Because it sounds like Madison Avenue. I'm like, it is Madison Avenue. So I was just like, I got a little, like everyone says, the weekend's been a very weepy weekend. So I was just like, little tears of joy and awesomeness for that introduction that you gave us this morning. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
And I don't think you're on, or at least I couldn't find you on Instagram, but we got a lovely photo of you up there.
I am. I just really got on there. I'm putting my.
You can see that.
Oh.
What is it? Because I tried to find it on your website and I couldn't, because I wanted to tag you and I couldn't. It didn't link me underneath your site. It said like Twitter.
You know what? Sadly, I've had to the last couple months deactivate some links because I've been getting a lot of harassment. So I've had to be a little bit harder to find, unfortunately.
Okay, well,
given the times we live in.
we won't put that out there.
No, it's okay. It's all good. I'm back up on Instagram now. I just had to deactivate for a while. That might have been what happened.
I hear that. It's been nice it's interesting. A lot of people feel free to make a lot of comments. Either directly out there or either through direct messaging, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but you're like, wow, did you want to think that through? Or you just wanted to put that out there and expect us to sort of digest that? Okay. Yeah. So I understand what you're talking about, but I don't want to take up anyone's time. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you. Happy Sunday.
Pleasure to meet you.
And Jen, we have other people. Kevin's my husband. He's under my picture. He's under Rodney. And then we've got Alex Jesus, who's part of our choir, who's just amazing. And we've got Jamie and Nancy sitting together in Lodi, New Jersey.
Oh, I know you.
And
I,
then we've
I
got-
unmuted you now, Aunt Nancy. You can say hello.
Okay, hi Jennifer.
Hi,
I remember you from
Nancy.
way back, and I
Of
was one of the
course.
people that had my hand.
I
trying to
know
reach
you were. I saw. Oh, and that's so good to see you, Nancy. I was wondering with the emails if Jamie was a relation of yours when I was.
Yes,
It's a blessing to see you, and I think I see a Dwayne too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay.
yeah.
Dwayne, you remember Jennifer Harvey?
Yeah, yeah,
Good to see you, Dwayne. Oh my goodness, it's been so many years.
yeah. Used to see her every Sunday.
Yeah,
Yep, absolutely.
all the time.
And it's funny, Jen, I'm in seminary now and I have to read you. So it's like, oh my God, look at that. I
Oh,
know her.
no.
Well, that's
I gotta
awesome.
read her and now listen to her preach. What? Where are
No,
you in
that was-
seminary, Jamie?
New York Theological Seminary.
Oh, lovely. Oh my goodness. Wow. That's
I
great.
start student ministry this year, so we'll see how all that goes.
Okay. All right. That's amazing.
And then we've got a couple of people. We've got Tracy McMillan.
Hi, Tracy.
She co-chairs the Board of Ed, Christian Ed. And we've also got Cheryl Sims, who, I don't know, you guys might have just missed each other. She's the
Hi, Cheryl.
last one on my list.
Hi, yeah, I loved your sermon, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
But yeah, I came after a couple of years after she had left. Yeah.
Okay. So and now that we know each other, I'm going to pitch it back to Susan to get us started.
Great. Well, I think hopefully did everybody see the service today? I hope you did. If you did not get a chance to watch that sermon, it is an absolute requirement that you go watch it like as soon as you hang up from this. You have to watch this. Seriously, Jen, I started out spitting out my coffee about the precious moments Christianity. That's how it started because there were precious moments in my home too. But then it was like from the laughter, it just moved into the tears of just those beautiful examples of that newspaper description of the kingdom of God. And then I wrote down that beautiful quote of when the church is not operating with a fully broken heart, then it's lost its call. I was like, wow, we're gonna have to unpack that like for a long time. So thank you so much. And I hopefully everybody heard the introduction, kind of Jen's resume in the beginning of the service. Just from a personal standpoint, Jen was my mentor at Madison. I was a student minister when Jen was the associate in preaching, and this is what I grew up with watching. Can you imagine? I mean, how unbelievably lucky was I? So she was the person that I was watching as I was trying to, get my preaching chops. And so Jen, just for so many different reasons, thank you for the gifts that you've brought our church, continue to bring, and brought me too. So just so honored to have you here with us today. I'd love to just throw it open and maybe just start with you, just telling us a little kind of personal info about like where tell us about your life now. Like you've got 2 kids, you mentioned in the sermon, and a partner, and life in Iowa. But just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how life is.
Oh my goodness. So those were kind things to say, Susan. I will say that it was amazing. As much as maybe what I hear you saying is there's some gifts I've brought to this community and to the world, I also, one of the biggest gifts in my life has been Madison Avenue Baptist Church. The call that I continue to try and walk today in the world, I really received at Madison Avenue and at Union Theological Seminary, which also is in the same building as NYTS. So right now in my life, I turned 50 this year, which is like, what? I don't feel 50, and I'm happy to be 50, but I feel like I'm still like 25 because I'm like still a learning mess. But I live in Des Moines, Iowa, where I moved like sight unseen in 2004. Never visited Iowa, when I found out I had a 1-year job offer out here at a time when I really needed a job, went and bought a car at Bayside Honda. And my best friend, Aaron, who still lives in New York City and actually is the biological father to my 2 children. We drove out, he dropped me off in the middle of the Midwest, and I've been here ever since. Never thought I would stay, and have been really, really happy here. So I've been in Iowa almost 20 years, which is longer than I lived in New York City. I was in New York about 12. And in that time, I have been teaching at Drake University, where I still work, mostly teaching during that time Christian ethics. And then lo and behold, after being here a year, I met my now current partner. And then lo and behold, 2 or 3 years later, we decided to have children. So I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, a daughter and a 10-year-old who identifies as non-binary and uses they, them pronouns. And I just get up and go to work every day at Drake University, and most of my work now, actually, even though I got there because I was a teacher in religion, my work on campus is 100% at this point focused on growing equity and inclusion and deepening our anti-racism commitment at Drake University, which is somewhat remarkable because it's a predominantly white institution. We call it a PWI. And most predominantly white institutions in higher education have significant challenges and racial disparities because of how racism just permeates higher ed. And Drake has been in flawed ways, but really serious ways, walking the walk of equity inclusion for about 12 years. And I've gotten to be part of that more and more with my work. And it's incredible because we're growing really, we've done all this amazing stuff around racial justice at Drake. And so it feels like a gift to be able to bring my professional self to my passions in the world at an institution. And then I spent a lot of time doing activism and organizing in Des Moines with young people and sometimes in churches. I preach sometimes, but mostly I'm friends with the clergy around here. And so the messy community that is Madison Avenue Baptist Church, my life has remained messy and complex because I'm just sort of doing things all over the place in sort of unusual ways and feeling really like what a gift it has been to be on this journey. So that's kind of what my life has looked like. And then somewhere along the way, I wrote a couple of books. So that Jamie is now having to read. I hope it's one that's there. Some are better than others, Jamie. So.
Well, let me follow up with one quick question, Jen, and then open it up for any other questions that folks might have. I was thinking during your sermon, I remember us talking back in the day that we had both kind of come out of similar, more conservative religious backgrounds. You're Harley riding evangelical family. For you to go from that to become one of the predominant, preeminent voices on anti-racism and white privilege is mind-boggling. How did that happen?
Yeah, so this is actually how it happened. I was just reflecting on this. So I grew up in Denver public schools. I'm from Denver, Colorado. And I grew up going to elementary school, junior high in the 70s and 80s when Denver public schools were under a desegregation mandate. So unlike a lot of white adults my age set, my first experiences in education were in very, very multiracial schools. And in fact, elementary school, I was demographically a racial minority because a lot of white families in the neighborhood I grew up in pulled their kids and put them in private school. And my parents did not do that. So my whole growing up formation was in multiracial space. But by high school, even though high school was a multiracial experience, my classes had gotten whiter and whiter because we were being racially tracked, which I didn't know what that was. That was being done to me, but I didn't know anything about that at the time, except I started to notice that because my best friends in elementary school had been Black girls. And I, in high school, started kind of noticing and going, where are all my friends? What happened? Something's up. And nobody was talking about that with me. I had no way to interpret that, but I definitely had specific moments where I was like, something is not right. I don't know what it is. Well, I also then had this deep God so loves the world formation from white evangelical Christianity. And as precious momentsy as that space was, and as complicated around gender, I really believed God so loves the world. I believed that was true. And so what happened was when I went to college, I went to a very conservative evangelical college. And when I got there, I started realizing, somehow I ended up volunteering at the Salvation Army. And I had my first experience spending time with unhoused families, learning about economic injustice. And I was doing it under the guise of ministry at this white evangelical college, or very white evangelical college, but it started to rattle me. I was like, wait, this is something that's a system people are describing to me. And I would do that. I'd go down and I was spending lots of time down there having my world just blown apart in all the right ways. But then I would go back up to this college campus where I was also falling in love with the study of theology. And the debates in my classes were things like, do women have a right to lead in the church, right? And so I would like notice there were all these white men that were like debating my right to lead in the church, which wasn't a new discussion for me. I grew up in a church that didn't let women do anything, but except ride Harleys. But and then I was like, I would like, oh yeah, but you're driving your Mercedes Benz right down homeless men and women and children. What is that contradiction about? And I just started going, this is, again, something's not right. And at some point in there, someone handed me a book by a man named James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology, one of my professors who is no longer at this school. And I started reading Cone, and Cone was like, yes, God is a God of love, which means God has to be a God of justice, because if God loves the world and suffering is happening and it's caused by injustice, then God cares about that. So God is a God of justice. And guess what? If God is a God of justice, then in the United States, God is Black, because Black people, as Cone would put it, and he would nuance this in important ways later, but Black people are the oppressed of the oppressed in the United States. Well, Cone didn't only change my theology understanding. The other thing that happened was, as soon as I read him, I was like, oh, that's what was going on in my K through 12 education too. That was white supremacy. I was raised in a white supremacist educational system, a white supremacist Christianity. And so this is the funny part. I thought, I mean, maybe it's funny at the time, I'm sure it was annoying to lots of my peers. I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to go study with James Cone in New York City, as a very entitled white girl might say. And so I tried to do that, and I sort of did that, but I came to Union in New York, and I showed up in this place, Union, which is just full of, leading, powerful students, scholars, activists, mostly of color, or, large numbers of African-American students, Latinx students. And I show up and I'm like, yeah, Jesus is Black, God is Black. And this community of people are like, yeah, okay. And we need you to simmer down a little bit, because did you notice your own skin tone there, my friend? And they started saying to me, you can talk about racism, and yes, God is Black, and God is Native American, and God, God is queer, but also you're white. And what does that mean? And that was going on for me at the same time I was moving into student ministry at Madison Avenue Baptist Church. And I was just beginning to really wrestle then with, what does my whiteness mean? And what does it mean to be faithful and see God as a God of justice, understand that's true, but also be living a life where, whether I like it or not, my embodiment puts me on and my history puts me on the other side of that line, right? I don't get to just claim justice when my entire family legacy is one that's been among the perpetrators. What does that mean? And so the reason I started writing, and I think I've ended up in a position where I've been able to talk to a lot of folks about that, is because the African-American and Latino and Latina people at Union Seminary really held me accountable and challenged me. And it was hard, because there were not a lot of folks talking about white people and their role in anti-racism at that point. That was 25 years ago. But they also loved me, and they wanted me to be accountable. And I for some reason, eventually I began to realize that accountability was a form of showing that I mattered. Like, I mattered, and that's why they were holding me accountable. And so I just feel like I've been trying to be faithful to that call that came from there and those people ever since. And that's really how it happened, is I showed up running around saying Jesus is Black in a place where folks were willing to say, yes, but you also don't get to say that without some complications. So figure that out. And I've been trying to do that ever since.
Thank God, Jen, that you have honored that struggle. I think all of us, try to think we do, but it's just so easy to gloss it and go, yes, I'm doing my anti-racism work. When, as you said in the wonderful essay that we sent out on Friday that you wrote in the Times, it's all about the bold, honest truth telling. That's very hard, especially when it comes to our kids, but it's truth telling about our own hearts and others. And God bless what your work and your continued work, because it's an inspiration for all of us to see what really needs to be done in our own hearts, in our communities, and in our world. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
We have an MABC parents group that's on WhatsApp. And they've been all excited, chit-chatting about this. But I know that we've got folk here that might have questions. So I want to open it up that you might want to talk to Jen. I do have 2 questions from the WhatsApp parents group if nobody has any other questions, or I can throw these in at the end. But let me just open it up and see if anybody would like to raise a question or a comment with Jen. this is usually not a quiet group. Alex.
First, I mainly have a comment. I really loved your sermon today. And also being a parent of a 9.5-year-old, in my situation where I am mixed, my husband is white, my son is pink. And we go to and he goes to a school, like we're here in the Bronx, and his school, I can't say like white kids are a total minority. I gotta say it's actually a pretty equal mix of Black, Hispanic, and white kids at his school. And I love that, he is seeing much more diversity, because I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, which I just call wealthy white bread suburbia. And when you were talking about growing up in a school system that was primarily white, and then and then we had busing. I'm sure, everybody's learned about busing in Massachusetts because of Charlestown, and there were a lot of protests. Luckily, there were not protests in my town. But that was the only way there were going to be Black people in my town, was through the busing program, which they still have. It's called Metco. But I am ever so glad that we had that, but I know there were families as well who were not as happy about it. And we grew up around the same time, because I'm also turning 50 later this year.
Welcome.
So, yes. Oh yeah, it's like all my friends, we're all turning 50 right now. But I did get a download of your book, and I can't wait to read it, because this is something that we've been talking about, and my son's school has made it, particularly since, he was finishing up 2nd grade and entering 3rd grade during the pandemic. And during all this talk about, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and just all of it happening so much. And so they were talking about racism in his classes, and misogyny, and all, they're bringing it all together. And I'm glad that he's getting this kind of education that I know I did not get when I was growing up. So I can't wait to read your book and check it out, because these are things that we have to talk about, and not in precious moments fashion.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Alex and Dwayne and Cheryl Sims participated last summer in something called Roundtable on Race that we did. So each week we would feature one of our folks of color to tell their story, their struggles, what they've been through, a very kind of personal, raw, verbal memoir, it's the best way to put it. And it's on YouTube, Jen, if you have time and you want to kind of check in. All of their stories are so powerful.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you guys are joining us today. Does anybody else have a question or comment that they'd like to share with Jen?
Why don't we go to the WhatsApp questions?
Yeah, okay. Let me throw. There were 2 that came in. One from Shakia, who was a mother of 3 little girls. Right, 3 girls. But the oldest one's named Lathan, and she had a wonderful question. Let me just pull my notes over here, and I'll just read it straight out. And it's about truth telling with regard to LGBTQIA issues. So this is the question. She said, "We were watching Cinderella on Prime, and there were all kind of alternative families represented on this version. What I believe is considered a drag queen, not sure, is the fairy godmother. While I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if I should push this into a learning moment. Lathan says, 'Mommy, don't worry. He's just pretending to be a girl. It's okay for him to use his imagination.' And she said, my response, Shakia, the mom's response is, I'm not worried. I love his dress." The point of the story, as Shakia says, is to please advise. Lathan is 4. Would you guys further this discussion at a level she can understand, or would you wait for her to ask when she's actually curious about the specific issue?
Yeah, I loved that. I did see the email you sent, and I loved that she
Good.
raised that question. And especially, I mean, I'm kind of learning about this as a parent who now has a kid, as I mentioned, who's pretty young to be using they, them pronouns. They're 10, and they started doing that when they were 8. And so early in their life, like age 2 or 3, we started going, oh, wait, how much do we say and ask? Because it was clear to us there was awarenesses for them that they didn't quite fit a binary, but we didn't know, so I resonate with how challenging it can be to know what you say when and what you ask or don't. I think, first of all, the way that what was the mom's name?
Shakia.
Shakia responded is so gorgeous, because the first thing she did, first of all, so I just want to affirm that. I know she's not here, but like, that's the beautiful response. Like, I wasn't worried. I was loving the dress, she kind of noted that her kid was sort of, by saying, don't worry, there's clearly something going on in the kid's sort of pre-schema kind of mind. Like, we build assumptions about reality long before we talk about them. And so by the time kids sometimes say things, they've already made a lot of conclusions that they haven't articulated verbally yet. So that worry that Lathan articulated, there's signals, there's something that they are assuming about gender normativity, thus they're reassuring their mom. So the fact that she first was like, I wasn't even worried, I was just loving the dress, amazing response, because it's just like, yeah, immediately kind of getting at that underlayer. I would be very curious. And for me as a parent, in the moment is often not when I have come up with the sort of most invitational responses, but like, I would be curious if about going back later, that night at bedtime or the next day and saying, hey, you know how you said, don't worry. I wonder what you think I was going to worry about. It'd be interesting to know what this 3 or 4-year-old might, in their own 3 or 4-year-old way, they might actually tell her something like, well, like, boys aren't supposed to wear dresses, like, which again, any invitation we can give to our kids to help them say out loud the assumptions that the ways they're interpreting reality, even if it's things that that feel uncomfortable, right? Because we don't want them saying things in public, right? I would rather my kids say to me out loud something about a racist or racial assumption they're making, so we can talk about it, than have them just continue to work it out silently. So I might circle back and just say, what do you think I was worried about? And just see what Lathan said, because I think that would be very interesting and would be open the invitation. The other thing I would say is that I think LGBT issues sometimes can feel as loaded for families as race and racial justice and racism conversations often feel for white families. And I know they feel lots of different ways for families of color for many layered, really significant reasons. But I know in white families, race conversations tend to create a lot of anxiety. I think with my own kids, with LGBT issues, especially transgender issues, we kind of early, as soon as there were kind of comments like that came up, but we were more attuned to this because we could tell that our second child's gender journey was not probably going to be cisgender. This was just evident in how they showed up in the world very young. We started actually saying, we don't know for sure if that's a man. Like maybe that's a man using his imagination, but actually there are some people who have a penis who are women. Like, we started saying that young to our children. And I don't think we would have thought to do that if we weren't very aware, because of how our second child sort of behaved very young, that we needed to make sure for their well-being, they knew that gender was fluid. But we started saying that young, and we were surprised that when they're really little, they just kind of go, oh, really? And whereas like, if they learn that when they're 8 or 9, then it's a whole like, wait a second, so I'm a fan of just kind of normalizing that too, that trans people exist. And so maybe he's not trans, yeah, maybe that's a man in a dress actually. But did you know that most of the time but sometimes actually there are people who their gender is different than what their bodies make us think, getting that into the mix early, I think is a really good, healthy thing to do. And it keeps the conversation flowing without sort of you don't need to get into all, over biologizing it or anything like that. So, but I just loved that example, that question. And I totally loved her response. I love the dress. I was coveting the dress.
Well, I'll make sure that that we get the recording to Shakia so that she can hear this and see this. And I loved your answer, Jen, and the idea of just being so honest at an early age. There was a piece in your New York Times article entitled, "Are We Raising Racists?" And again, we sent that out on Friday. So if you guys haven't had a chance to read that, please do. There was a piece in there that you said as early as age 5, children recognize differential treatment, and understand something of the status of different racial groups at that
Yes.
early of an age. And so, and I would assume that that probably applies equally to gender status,
Yes.
you know, and differences. And so just that idea that there, you know, in that young impressionable point, that honesty is so important.
Yes.
So
Yes.
important.
Because the other thing about age 5, we know this about race. It's probably true with gender too, maybe a little bit less so, because since most of us have families where there's more than one gender, it's probably feels less taboo to kids, but I'm just kind of speculating. But with race, by age 5, kids do absolutely know those things. All the studies show it over and over. And a lot of kids by age 5 know that they're not supposed to talk about it in front of adults. They've done studies where they've watched kids play with race on the playground. And so they'll use, all kids, not just white kids, they'll use racial language to like exclude in their play and say like, well, oh, we're only going to put, you know, no black kids on the swing, or only no white kids on the swing. Right. And they'll use race to kind of include and exclude. And sometimes, and so they've done these studies where kids will do that, and they've got an observer that the kids don't know is there hearing them do that. And then if at some point a kid goes reports to a teacher like so-and-so is being mean, they will typically strip the racial ethnic components of the meanness from the telling of it to a teacher. And they'll just say, oh, so-and-so is being mean, but they'll often not report and just, you know, talk about the race, because they know adults can't really handle it. And so for me, part of the challenge and the invitation of caregiving and parenting is not only giving our kids the right answers. Oh my goodness, no, if that's what we're going to do, we're never going to talk about any of this stuff. It's making sure the kids in our lives know that we are an askable adult. Like even if I screw it up, I don't want my 5-year-old thinking there's anything about race or sex or sexuality or bodies or gender that they can't talk to me about. That to me is the goal, to keep a conversation flowing where I get to sort of redirect and find out what they're learning and share my values and make it clear this is not scary and it's not unsafe for you to talk about this with me. Because I don't want my kid interpreting and drawing conclusions on their own, or God forbid, from others on the playground, right? And so much that makes us nervous, it gets nervous because we've got adult reasons for nervousness about it. 3-year-olds don't have that yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Jen, I want to jump in. I was just over my neighbor's house this morning for like 20 minutes, half hour. They have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and their grandparents were there. And they were talking about how they were with their other grandchild, who's 5, yesterday. And they live in Connecticut, and they drove through town. There was a 9/11 event. And the 5-year-old they were trying to explain to the 5-year-old what 9/11 was. And they talked about the plane went into the building, and they're in the car, and the grandmother is freaking out because the child is just not believing what they're peddling. And the grandmother is vigorously texting her overprotective daughter and son-in-law saying, how am I supposed to answer these questions? And what you're saying here is how the young children innately know when you're not being fully honest, or they're just not. He was aware, and he has toy planes and he has toy Legos and buildings. And why a plane, why someone would do that, it didn't make sense to him. And it's like, this child is 5. We can't say the word terrorist. And they were caught off guard to the point where they just didn't know what to say. And as of today, it's still kind of unresolved. And they just changed the question. They changed the subject slightly because the grandparents didn't want to say something the overprotective helicopter mom parent is going to freak out about and cause a rift. And they also didn't understand what he could actually comprehend. And it's interesting, as you're talking about race and how they do know more, the kids always know more than we think that they know, and they're always processing more. So I thought it was, and this weekend it's just the 9/11 stuff is just so prevalent. And I read some articles this week that talked about asking people not to post photos of the buildings on fire because it triggers PTSD.
Yeah.
And I found a beautiful image on an Instagram account called Pictures of New York, which was, I think, and I found it partially because Raquel had posted a beautiful photo of the Statue of Liberty and the blue lights. And it was just like this idea of, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but this idea of knowing when to be sensitive and knowing when to be honest. And I just wish we all could be as hip and smart as Shakia and just saying that I was looking at the dress, because I don't know how to change the subject with a funny quip when it's 9/11. So.
Yeah.
Let me just jump in really quick, Joe. That is such a great question and a perfect segue to the second MABC family question, which was about 9/11. So let me just, I know.
I'm not even in that group. Oh my God.
You're amazing. So let me just read this real quick for the folks. I know Jen has seen this, but this is from Catherine Kampf. On the theme of difficult topics, I'll add, my little Cooper is obsessed with firefighters, and we live 4 blocks from the Freedom Tower. On 9/11, we always go to a local fire station to thank the heroes with cards and buy dinner for the firefighters. Given all of the attention on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the events in our neighborhood, I'm getting more questions from him about what happened. I try to focus on the bravery of our heroes, but he recently asked me, why was the building on fire? Happy to take any input of how to communicate this day without terrifying a 3-year-old whose mama works in 3 World Trade.
Wow.
Yeah. So Jen, please.
Well, so I mean, the first thing I want to say is like, I am humble enough to know that one should always caveat any response to a question like that with like, you know your kid, I do not. Every child is different. Every personality is different. As we've taught our kids explicitly about all kinds of things growing up, including racism, my 2 children are different. I could teach my younger child things that much more directly because their sensitivity is different than my elder child who has really bad nightmares, right? So we've had different strategies even with both of our kids. And I guess the thing I would sort of notice is that it's probably not less scary for a three Cooper. I don't know how, I don't remember 3. It's probably not less scary to Cooper to just think buildings spontaneously are on fire than it is for Cooper to have some way of explaining why the buildings were on fire. So it's not that I think one should be very mindful of how of how we talk to a 3-year-old about something that could really trigger a deep sense of unsafety in their own environment and world at that developmental stage, right? But I think if Cooper's asking that question, it's because something about buildings being on fire actually feels pretty scary. And so Cooper seems like they're trying to understand something to help them have a little bit of a framework to kind of then be able to go, oh, okay, so, okay, that could happen here. That means probably my building couldn't just spontaneously be on fire. So just sort of noticing that I think is really important. And so I think probably I would try something like, a very sort of generic, but like, here's a generic cause. There were some people that were really mad and at the United States, and sometimes in the world when people are angry at each other, unfortunately, people do harmful things, and we're the kind of people that are trying to work to make the world a more peaceful place, but the world isn't always a peaceful place. And I would probably talk about it, especially with a kiddo whose parent works in the Freedom Tower, works in World Trade Center 3. I would probably talk about it the world's, this happened because people were mad and violent things do happen, but not emphasize the World Trade Center piece of it, right? Because that's where his mom works. And so that part, as much as I could kind of speak truthfully, because I think it sounds to me like he's seeking some understanding to actually help him feel a little safer, right? Combined with curiosity, but without sort of getting into the World Trade Center piece as much as possible. Or if that comes up because Cooper asks, then it's like, you know what? And yeah, and you know what? This was 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. And lots of people are working to make the world a safer place. And I don't feel worried going to work. I don't want you to worry about me. I'm fine. Just like that kind of, but 3 is about the time. I mean, kids start to know that the world has death in it and harm and violence, and being able to talk about with them, especially if they're asking, actually is more reassuring to them, I think, than if they think that like a building just catches on fire by itself, and again, then you also can tell what they are worrying about and the more we know what our kids are worrying about, the more we can give them responses that create connection and engage them. And the less we risk telling them things that they're actually not asking about, right? So like my kids, if they're not asking about X, Y, and Z, I try not to offer too much information about that because it might be overloading to their developmental framework.
Well, I know Catherine will appreciate that insight, Jen. Thank you for that. And
Thanks,
maybe Joe, that
Catherine.
would be helpful for, your conversation with your family and friends on that too.
I do want to just say I was in New York on September 11th as well. Actually, it was right after I'd left Madison, just finally. And so I was there, but not serving at Madison Avenue Baptist anymore. And I remember talking to my 4-year-old niece that night on the phone when we finally got phone service back. And she was in Colorado, but I remember her asking me some of these hard questions and just how difficult it was to kind of figure out what to say and how to help her make sense. So I definitely also really resonate with how, especially with September 11th, when many of us in this space have trauma from it ourselves, right? How difficult it is to figure out how to engage our kids and youth about it.
Well, I'm conscious of Jen and everyone's time on the call. Let me just open it up and see if there's anyone else that has a comment or question, and then I'll throw one last piece out for Jen and we'll close. Does anybody have something they'd like to say or to ask Jen? Alex?
Seems I just had this conversation with Benjamin this weekend because we had not talked about it really much before. And, he's 9 now, so he's definitely, he's not 3, but it's been in the news. He's seen this stuff on TV. And so I was doing my best to explain it to him. I said, just as honestly, but still not in a scary way either, just say, well, this thing happened. There were these people, they flew planes into these buildings. There are now footprints. They call them the footprints in their fountains, and that's where these buildings used to be. And I did not mention too much that, my husband works in 3 World Trade Center right now. And so I didn't make that relation, about how close it is and how that had been a building that had been damaged at one point as well. But I also showed, we watched the musical Come From Away.
Oh.
And because I wanted to talk about also the kindness that came out of this. We had this tragedy that was very scary, and people died and people were hurt, but we also had these amazing feats and acts of kindness from all over the world. And so this was another way for him to see what was going on and to hear about that day, but also see it wrapped in a different way, and not in such a frightening manner.
Yeah.
But like, he knows this happened, but then, and knew people were scared and knew this was a scary day, but also that people, in a way, look out for the helpers kind of thing. And that we could come together at this time. Because I think that show is so, it talks about everything. It talks about, the planes and a woman whose son was a firefighter and she's trying to find him. There's an Egyptian man who is being looked at because he is Muslim. But he ends up being a chef and helps with all the food project because they had 7,000 people who had landed in this area of Newfoundland. And so they bring up so many of the issues that came out from that time. And so that's why I felt it was sort of I don't want to just say safe way, but a way to allow this conversation in a less terrifying way for a child to accept and learn about.
I
So
love that. That also, and it also shows how folks were tempted for a while to like end up going at each other, that musical, but then they come through it, which is so beautiful. And I think that's a brilliant way to think about. That's brilliant, I think. Because it's a way of also like putting it in a context of aspiration and value and love. And I think I wouldn't have made this connection before, but whenever I talk, especially with parents who, white parents in particular, who are trying to do a better job teaching their kids about racism than most white adults got from our parents, I try and really remind them that every time we teach about racism, yes, truthfully, honestly, etc., we also need to teach and make visible to our kids anti-racist collective struggle together, so that they normalize. People are always coming together, fighting for justice, because so many of us believe in a world where everyone gets to belong. And that sounds like, that feels like what this is too, like these hard things, truth telling about them. And this is what it calls us to be. Keeping that constantly in the truth telling we do with our kids is really vitally important if we want them to sort of grow into a sense of agency, hope, and possibility.
Yeah.
This is truly holy space, and I don't want to cut the conversation off. Anybody? Last call for Raquel.
I just want to say thank you for today. I'm mentoring a 12-year-old non-binary child who is Black. They are adopted into a white family, and both parents are police officers. So it's a lot going on. So I just want to thank you for your guidance on sort of putting the questions back to them, as far as trying to understand how much they understand versus just sort of holding back information from my point of view. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you for talking us through this today.
Thanks so much, Raquel. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Anyone else?
I just want to say I thought this was great and timely, and what are you doing in like 5 weeks, Jen? We'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Give you a little break, just saying.
Let me transition then to my last question to Jen, and that is, we have missed you, and we just are so excited to, this is like a homecoming.
Yes.
And we don't want this to be the only time. So, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but at a minimum, I know everyone would like to be able to keep in touch in terms of just watching your work, know about your books. How can they find out more about you and what's going on? And so if you could just share a little bit about how people can keep in touch and just keep track of your work and to read some of the stuff that you've done.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So when I'm not having to deactivate to just, for my own sanity, my most active space is on Facebook. So if you just look up Jennifer Harvey, I've got a public page there. You can follow me there. I tend to do some of my stuff that ends up in books later. I first write about there because I have a great community of people there that talk with me. So Jennifer Harvey, Des Moines, Iowa, weirdly enough. I do a little bit now. I'm learning Instagram and realizing I like it. So at Dr. Jen Harvey, it's up in the chat, is my handle. I know what that means now. And I'm occasionally dipping in and out of Twitter. I still have kind of a challenging relationship with Twitter, but that's also at Dr. Jen Harvey. So if you are on any of those platforms, my articles and books that may come out at some point, I always announce them there. And then I also have a website where I try and keep it sort of updated, which is jenniferharvey.org. And if I come back to New York someday, when we get through this journey we are walking, as I said, my kiddo's biological dad, my partners and my kids, he is in New York. He went to Union Seminary too. And so when it's safe for us all to travel again, we will be coming to visit, because we have not seen him now for almost 2 years. And I will let you know when I'm there. Well, that would just be the most fabulous thing ever. So we're gonna hold you to that, Jen. Okay. And we're gonna be virtual for a little while longer. So, it's a lot easier to bring people in like this. Yes. So that's true. Really, really wonderful. And just to remind everyone, if you would like a digital copy of Raising White Kids or other of Jen's books, just write Brian at the church office and we will send it to you. So we want people to be able to access these books on a digital framework. And so please let us know. We'd love to share her writing with you. Jen, what can I say? This was just so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for your work, for your ministry, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for coming. Yes, big hearts. Yes. Thank you. Hearts to everyone. So much love. Be well.
See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.